Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Sunday morning Roundtable discussion. Today is a beautiful day in Plainfield, Sunday, April 14th, 2019. We are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America, and we welcome you all. And we'll start today with our morning prayer.
That's from page 165 of Miscellany by Mrs. Eddy. Goodness never fails to receive its reward, for goodness makes life a blessing. As an active portion of one's stupendous whole, goodness identifies man with the universe of good. Thus may each member of this church rise above the oft-repeated inquiry, "What am I?" to the scientific response, "I am able to impart truth, health, and happiness. And this is my rock of salvation and my reason for existing."
Thank you. Miscellaneous writings. Mary Baker Eddy. We today in this classroom are enough to convert the world if we are of one mind, for then the whole world will feel the influence of this mind, as when the earth was without form, and mind spake, and form appeared. We'll start this morning with our watching point.
Watch number 382. Watch that you finish and clean up every demonstration by knowing that the error was never real, never present, never happened, never had a manifestation, nor was there ever such a claim. Only in this way can you guard against a relapse. Whatever the claim was, you may believe it to be real again if you hold that you did believe it in it formally. The only scientific attitude is to know you never had it. Once, when a patient asked Gilbert Carpenter if he should stop treatment, he said, quote, "Give me one more day in which to know that you never had the claim," end quote.
This is such an important point. Very often you will go back to, whatever the accident you had or the disease you had or whatever, and hear saying, don't do it, only to know it was never the truth. Because that makes perfect sense, right? You're acknowledging it, you're believing it happened. And the human mind likes to go over and over those things. In the lesson in Science and Health, number 4, it says, until that which contradicts the truth of being enters into the arena, that is, when the mist went up, evil has no history. And evil is brought into view only as the unreal in contradistinction to the real and eternal. Evil has no history. And we've been taught here, and you work with it, that if it wasn't good, it never happened in divine mind. And why do you have the right to say that?
Because God never made it.
God never made it. And if it seemed to have happened, what was really happening?
It was a mesmerism that you believed.
Yes. This whole lesson, I thought it was wonderful. Florence said how many times illusion and delusion are mentioned. Are sin, disease, and death real? It was an illusion or a delusion. It was the Adam dream, and that is why you have the right to say it. We don't go around and think your dreams are real, do you? No, and hopefully you don't.
Away from them.
Pardon me?
So some dreams you're happy to awake from them. So
Yes, very much so. And then you don't go round and around with them and give them reality. So no more. Whatever happened in the past that wasn't good, you can know that it never happened in Divine Mind. Excuse me, because in Divine Mind it didn't. You had a dream and you awakened from it. Lawrence?
no, I think the point of reflection, being a reflection, has helped me in the sense that there is no reflection that can be different from the image that it's reflecting. And when I learned that, of course, it's taken quite a time, years probably, to really accept that, yes, I am the reflection of God, and what God doesn't have, I couldn't possibly be the reflection of. And that concept has helped.
Thank you very much. That's sticking with the truth of being. So make sure always you're doing this, clearing your slate, as I say, every time something happens that doesn't seem to be good, to make sure you, as Carpenter says, know it. It has no history. It never happened in Divine Mind. And then that frees you from the belief of relapse. And if you are having relapses, then check yourself. Did you believe it happened?
I think also, by knowing it didn't happen and letting go of it being a possibility, you don't, if somebody else says they have that claim, you don't think that's possible.
Well, that's right. You see the unreality of the whole thing. And my goodness, Jeremy has a beautiful blue full text.
Yeah, it printed one out like this. I really love it.
Robin's egg too. So, well, yeah, it's a most important point, and please apply it in your life. You will find it very helpful. And then Mrs. Eddy says if things, if it does happen again, you keep working on it, and it will diminish until it finally disappears, never to be dismayed or give it reality ever. Stay strong, and it will diminish till it finally disappears. That's all it can do. Because the subject, are sin, disease, and death real? No. Right. But all of the material world, all of mortal mind, says, oh yeah, they are. So that's why, if sometimes it seems like an uphill battle, well, that's okay. Just get stronger. That's it. You get stronger.
This is not something you just jump into. I mean, this is most of us take a while, and still have to work at it. Because, to one who is suffering, the disease does seem very real. And you can't just kind of, preach at them. But you have to clear your own thinking. And as Mary said, most of mankind still believes that they are real. They have some kind of a normal place in existence. It's a confused thought because they try to get rid of it, or at least, they try to get rid of the disease and the death. Sometimes they like the sin, but they don't like the punishment for it. But they still consider it real. So, it's a confused thought. And the reason it's a confused thought is because it's not true. You can't serve God and mammon. That's simple. It's one or the other. And until Mrs. Eddy came along, of course, Jesus tried his hardest to explain to people that they weren't real. He proved it to them that it wasn't real. And yet, how many people got it at that time? Well, maybe 12 of his disciples, maybe a few others that we haven't heard from.
And most of them didn't get it until the resurrection. So, yeah, and it is certainly something, yes, thank you, Gary, you don't go around telling people this, there's no disease, or even, preaching it at your children in that way, because that's just a huge turnoff. There's no love.
It comes across as indifferent.
Well, it does, and most often it is, because most often it is stated without any real deep understanding of what it means. So it's just parroting words.
But like Gary said, sorry.
Well, Mrs. Eddy says in Science and Health that nothing ails you. So go ahead, Florence.
No, I said, like Gary said, if in your own thinking, be the onlooker, the one that this is happening to, is the consistency of staying with the direction of, the right or the real, which Mrs. Eddy often says, you stick to the truth of being, and you stick with there, whether it's years or what, it does come more real. The truth becomes more real after some time.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Thank you.
And you have every day to prove it and to make progress in that respect. And that's how it works. Seemed much more real to me many years ago than it does now, because I'm working at it for a long time. So progress is God's law, and this is the truth. And what's so wonderful with Mrs. Eddy is it's a science, and she explains it like a science, like a math, logically, right?
Yeah, and it's something she discovered herself. She discovered it. And somewhere she acknowledges that, Jesus was a natural scientist. Came naturally to him because God endowed him with the truth. But, and for us mere mortals, it has to be learned. But it can be learned. And you learn it by experience, by studying and then applying what you study. Test it. It's the kind of thing, if someone asks you, say, well, don't take my word for it. Test it. Try it. Because it works. That is how people will prove it to themselves. It's step by step.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, it was interesting that Jesus, when he was a boy and his parents couldn't find him, that he was sitting there talking to the learned men in Israel and asking them questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
And answering questions, too.
And answering, I'm sure. Yeah.
It was about his father's business. So, yes. And, of course, we know Mrs. Eddy was very spiritually minded as well. She was doing healings even as a child and understanding things. So, but it's something, if you feel you don't know it, you can learn it. And you learn by studying and practicing it. And it's your divine right to know it. It's your God-given right.
Because it's the truth about who and what you are. That's what's so neat about it. It's not like it's something special or different. It is your natural state.
Golden text, Psalms 107. He sent his word and healed them and delivered them from their destruction. And I think it's interesting. Delivered them from their destruction. So what does that mean to us?
Self-imposed?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Self-imposed.
Our suffering is self-imposed.
And that's why, so many people believe that God God did create sin, disease, and death.
Or that he somehow endorses suffering as a means to some, finding him.
All of which is false. Suffering sometimes does help us find him, but that's not because God endorses it or causes it, because we have to have it burned out of ourselves. So, but yeah, it's always self-imposed. Remember that. Don't ever blame God for any kind of suffering, because then your best friend becomes your worst enemy, and then you're stuck. Which is what some people find themselves in, that dilemma when they blame God. If God caused your disease, why would you want to love him? Why would you worship him? Why would you do any of that?
And why would you pray also? If he caused it, why are you praying?
That's it.
Yeah. And if he caused it, it must be a good thing. So why would you want to get rid of a good thing, right? But that's why some people become atheists. They're taught that God, brings suffering, God does this, God does that. And people say, well, to hell with that.
Yeah, right. Who would want that? And to hell with that false concept of God. And false concepts of God, just like anything else, lead to all kinds of suffering. And again, you're in this Adam dream where you're not really understanding anything. And so that's why the proper understanding of God is what's liberating, as we're going to talk about this morning. So with the golden text, Parthens on the forum says he sent his word and healed them. Reading the scripture brought to remembrance the hymn, "Saw ye my Savior, heard ye the glad sound, felt ye the power of the word." And then he goes in, "Saw ye," visual reception of the word, i.e. with discernment, spiritual sight, that's from Science and Health. "Heard ye," auditory reception of the word, i.e. with understanding, spiritual hearing. "Felt ye," kinesthetic reception of the word, with full consciousness, spiritual sense of touch. And then in order for the word to heal, after it is sent, it must find entrance. And he goes into the parable of the sower. And some thought is a lot more receptive than others, as we know in that beautiful parable of Jesus. It has to find that entrance. And this goes to, in Science and Health, citation 13. Jeremy, would you read the second paragraph?
Self-love is more opaque than a solid body. In patient obedience to a patient God, let us labor to dissolve with the universal solvent of love the adamant of error, self-will, self-justification, and self-love, which wars against spirituality and is the law of sin and death.
The adamant, what does adamant mean? A hard place.
The stone.
Obstinate.
Obstinate, stubborn, impenetrable. People,
Also like self-asserting.
yes, people have it's so ingrained they don't even know they're doing it. But every time you speak the truth to them, or trying to gain entrance to their thought, they have this ready answer. It's a wall they build, a wall. And that wall, the light can't find an entrance. And all at the same time, they think they're doing something good, or, they're good people. How dare you say anything to me that would suggest otherwise? I know this because I once had this wall and I didn't know I had it, but I was so defensive, always an answer, always defending myself, defending my actions, defending everything. It was such an exhausting way to be, but at the time it was all I knew, and thank goodness Mrs. Evans kept beating me up, really, mentally, not physically, but anyway, she kept at it. And that's the only way. It needs a 2x4. The adamant of error needs a 2x4. I've never known it to just dissipate gentle, loving words.
That's the problem with self-justification. Usually you can talk yourself out of a situation normally. And I think that's where you got it from. I think that's why Mrs. Eddy's rule for a household includes that excuses are intolerable.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Excuses are intolerable. So when you come to the Christ for healing of sin, disease, or death, we've talked about you have to come with all your defenses down. That's why the Beatitudes, the humbleness of spirit. You've got to, and what Mrs. Eddy says, you've got to wrestle with the strong man. The strong man being mortal mind. You've got to put it down. This is why last week we did it on Study to Be Quiet, because that human carnal mind rises up. So what did you say about self-love?
Well, I wanted to make sure I knew the difference between self-love and loving yourself, because it's been said at the round table, you can't love yourself, you can't truly love others. So I looked around for a couple different things, but I found in Herbert Eustace, he was quoting Mrs. Eddy, but talking about matter held as a shadow is the idea of God, but matter held as substance is the belief of an error. And you know that a shadow followed back always leads to what is shadowed forth. So I was thinking about that, and then I thinking also about the peace where there is no peace, being taken in the name of God in vain. So I thought self where there is no self. It's amazing how often that little thing has helped me. So I'm very grateful for that.
Well, and I wrote too the difference between this self-love and the right sense of love is selfless, divine love. And self-love is always about me, myself, and I. It's selfish. That's it. It's selfish. And I loved what you wrote. You know, you quoted about what Mrs. Eddy said when she was tempted to think about herself. What did she do?
Once Mrs. Eddy told Laura Sargent and Clara Shannon that she thought she had discovered the way to eternal life, and that was, whenever she wanted to do something for herself, to put self aside and do something for others, just to learn to be unself.
Thank you very much. That's a beautiful quote. I don't remember reading that one. But it was something we were taught here, and when Mrs. Evans would have people who were very obstinate. You know, you can call someone obstinate. That doesn't mean that you're not seeing the child of God, because someone mentioned this to me this week. It means you are seeing the child of God, and you're seeing something obstinate hanging over their head, and you've got to kill it so it doesn't continue. Anyway, when there were particularly obstinate people that she was having trouble getting through to, she would tell them that they had to go out and do something anonymously and unselfishly for someone at least once a day. It helped break the self, the adamant of error. You all remember that? Some of you were asked to do it.
Work. I've been listening.
Good. Because you're getting out of yourself and blessing others, and that's always a great blessing. So the adamant of error, be aware of it and don't let it rise up in you. Any of the self qualities has to be selfless, divine love. Otherwise, you've built a wall, and very hard to break through that wall. There were even those that Jesus did not heal. So, thank you, Parthon. Or, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Parthon, too, if you're listening. So, he ends his forum with, God grant that I be conformed to a fitness to receive, to hold the word requisite for translating carnal mindedness, seeing, hearing, feeling, unreality, into spiritual mindedness, experiencing with all my spiritual faculties the world of reality, not in a flighty way, but as something to which I am long accustomed, the habitude of holiness. Delaney, 127. So, ask yourself, do you see the Savior? Do you see the Christ in yourself and in others? Do you hear the glad sound? What are you hearing? Have you felt the power of the Word? Ask yourself now those questions. And if you're not, make sure you are.
And it's a mental discipline. It's not something you can just kind of turn on or turn on. Something you have to work at. One good step in working in that direction is to do as Mary said, Mrs. Evans used to tell us. Just when you feel like doing something for yourself, anonymously do something for somebody else first.
With no sense of reward, and because that will ruin it, that goes back to self again. And, watching is one way. Anyone can watch, and that's a selfless thing to do. In the article, which I'm going to refer to today, The Word Made Flesh, that's addressed by Martha Wilcox. She says on 413, the Word is Christ, and Christ is what mind is consciously. Christ is the divine idea, concretely existing as health, harmony, sight, hearing, form, all the quantities and qualities that now are. We need to admit these to be actual, and then we can prove that they are imperishable, unalterable. Jesus demonstrated that the flesh of the Word was at hand as imperishable sight and hearing and wholeness and supply. The flesh of the Word was also an evidence as his own incorporeal, weightless, incorruptible, deathless being or body. We must look beyond and above the evidence of the material senses. The Word made flesh. Mrs. Eddy says is the truth rendered practical, or it is the truth or understanding in its evidence, exhibited as active practice or living. The Word made flesh is the truth in demonstration or in concrete evidence, is the truth or the actual exhibited in practice or daily living. So this science that we are reading about has to be proven and lived, and it should be proven and lived in a better life in every way, more harmonious in every way. So if you're not experiencing that, then dig deeper, work harder, and understand it's your divine right, too, because it is the truth. And again, do you see your Savior? Are you listening to the glad sound? Or are you listening to all the negative rah, 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 rah? And have you felt that power of the Word? I love the hymn. Beautiful. So, now, Linda, you wrote about, parenting, which is also in the lesson. Do you want to say anything about it? And Charlie, too.
Well, actually, I just thought it was interesting that you had read that quote from Mrs. Eddy, from Miscellany, on page 339. People can go see that, about fasting, and it really was about silencing the appetites and passions, but that really just goes back to the self, I realized. And I realized that some of what I needed to do was this emotional reaction, and to watch and pay attention. And that's what I needed to silence. That's what was getting me in trouble. And that's the passion she talks about, and that wars against spiritual.
Thank you. And Shardy?
Well, let's talk about sober. And I remember that that's one of the ways to destroy animal magnetism. So, and then it hit me, too. I'm aware of it, but to actually articulate it, that everything here is interwoven. And that's a beautiful thing. It all makes spiritual. And when you start to realize that,
Thank you. Yeah, it was interesting to me because a week or two ago, I had talked about expressing the joy and happiness that comes with the science, how important that is, and joy and gratitude are two essential ingredients to any healing. But then I read, and probably in the Blue Book, but anyway, it was where Mrs. Eddy said that scientists must be serious and sober. This is a serious science. So again, this is why we say there are many things that Mrs. Eddy says, but I think she's referring to not be giddy and overly giggly and just, Pollyanna.
Unworldly. Otherworldly.
Yeah. There is a soberness about this, most definitely. We have our times of joy, yes, and that joy is always with us. This lesson, he says, the joy, my joy might remain in you, that your joy might be full. We have this, it's a continual sense of joy and peace.
It's a substantial joy that no one can take from you. And it's the joy that comes from feeling God's love within you and knowing that it is so all-encompassing. It is such a support, it's such a protection, it's such a fulfillment that there's nothing left that you would ever need or want that God's love doesn't supply for you. And it gives you a peace that is unspeakable, that you can't find any other way. That is the joy of the Lord, substantial joy. And it comes with work, seriousness, soberness. It comes from living a God-like life. It comes from disciplining your thought. And it's the result of working in the right direction. And no one can take that joy from you.
Yeah, I don't think anything could give me more joy than having a purpose and real work. Very glad to be here.
Yeah, well, that is so true.
Yeah.
So it definitely is sort of a combination. But I wanted to bring that out. The soberness is very important. She said it's needed to do the work. You can't be flying around and giddy and giggling. You have to have the soberness. But you do have a joy, too. And you see the bright side of things, and you also see the humor in life. She says to keep your grin ahead of your groan. She also told someone in her home who answered the door always to, do it in a dignified way. She said there's just too much smiling going on. That's a paraphrase. So why would she say that?
Well, from me, I learned that it was really opening the door for animal magnetism in the sense that it's inviting the thought in a friendly way, and it's like, well, okay, then I can go right there and get into that thinking and may have a heyday. Because I've learned that when if I'm not sober and I do that, invite it, and I have more to work with, whatever thought I have not handled, because I wasn't aware of what was going on and I didn't defend myself.
Thank you very much.
Right, because you invite personal sin.
Thank you.
You invite personal sin. Your thought always has to be discerning, and that's the soberness.
Yes, thank you.
You always have to be alert. Mrs. Eddy said, Christian scientists have enlisted in a warfare. You can't fight a war, with the giddy, lackadaisical attitude. You got to be alert to identify the enemy. And when you have identified the enemy, and when you have destroyed the enemy, you have a joy that is greater than any kind of happiness you could ever have.
And it's true with you. If you are having a problem, sometimes just to sit still and be very quiet, God will speak to you as to what maybe more you need to know, or something you need to do, or perhaps something you've done that's not in accord. He will speak to you. He's always talking to you. And it's very important that you listen. Usually something is very easily and quickly rectified if you do that listening. Now, if you listen and he tells you something, and you don't obey him, and you continue on in your old ways, well, it requires the humility to change. If he's telling you there's something, in your home life you have to deal with that you refuse to, well, you have to do it. You have to be obedient, as we talked about in yesterday's class. There's always the right answer. I know it with myself. If ever I'm not feeling right, I'll just ask God, what is this? What is it that I need to know, Father? And it will come. And I can correct whatever it is. Sometimes and many times it's a belief of life and matter. Sometimes it's something else. Sometimes it's a personal sense of someone you're living with that you refuse to deal with, as I said, or sometimes you went somewhere. Maybe you went to some place that exposed you to a lot of negative, even malicious thinking that you didn't defend yourself from. So this is why you are required to be sober, so you can hear and see and discern what's going on. You can also be gracious, loving, and joyful at the same time. They're all qualities of God. Okay, now we'll get into Florence. What Florence wrote on the form is most important, and it is the gist of this lesson, saying that sin, disease, and death are illusions and delusions. So, Florence. Can you speak?
Yes, I think I can. The Webster says that illusion is deceptive appearance, false show, by which a person is or may be deceived or his expectations disappointed. And then she also has mockery. That I thought was, wow. And he has delusion as the act of deluding, deception, and misleading of the mind. We are all liable to the delusions of artifice. False representation. But necessarily from page 385, where in the lesson where she says, any supposed information coming from the body or from inert matter, as if either were intelligent, is an illusion of mortal mind, one of its dreams. Realize that the evidence of the senses is not to be accepted in the case of sickness any more than it is in the case of sin. And she goes on. But I think what I said was that all freedom, true freedom, as only God can give. If I become obedient to his laws. When I did not know better, I never continually prayed, which is I did not stay alert to correct my thinking when I saw someone in a wheelchair, someone limping, an ambulance with flashing lights, fire trucks speeding by. I didn't know that I had to do something. But when I learned here, this is Evans's classes, about that, to correct your thought even in those cases, I started to live as such and realized that that way of living is selfless. It blesses others, but it blesses me too by reinforcing my alertness to mortal mind's lies so that I can cite a counterfeit for myself more quickly when tempted with an illusion. And then the instruction to live this way makes us a law unto ourselves, and in order to avoid error's mockery. And I like that last part because I don't like to be mocked.
I know, that was wonderful. That's right. We don't want to be mocked by this.
That's very good.
Yes, it is. And so this is living the selfless life, not the selfish. For instance, okay, you meet someone who has a cold. What do you say? Oh, gee, I don't want to get the cold. Stay away from me. You got germs. That's the self-thought. Or do you know that only good is contagious and that this person is a child of God and all you can get from them is love and that's all that you can give? That's selfless. This is how you demonstrate it moment by moment. The same thing. You see an ambulance go by. Oh, my goodness, what's happening? Oh, dear. Or do you know God good governs, and wherever they're going is God will be there, his presence and power felt. This is praying without ceasing. This is being alert and working in your science moment by moment and not dipping into the human mind and then scrambling to get back again. And in this way, you become not deceived. I love this definition of delusion. I've given it to you before, but I don't know where I got it. But anyway, a fixed, dominating, or persistent false mental conception. And then resistant to reason with regard to actual things or matters of fact. So a delusion is something, you're accepting even though it's been proven false. And you fight it, believing it to be true. And in science, we have learned, and it's been proven, that sin, disease, and death are unreal. Many, many times it's been proven. So the delusion is to keep fighting and saying, yes, it is real, it is real. I see it with my eyes. That goes back to, I hear it, I feel it. That goes back to Parsons. What are you seeing, hearing, feeling? In Martha Wilcox, The Word Made Flesh, years ago in a lecture, Mr. Kimball told the story of an insane woman who was deluded into thinking that her arms were covered with feathers. She was sure of it. She both saw and felt the feathers. He gave this illustration to show that sickness or disease were wholly delusions and were never objectified or externalized, and that one could never remove the feathers by treatment. The feathers did not fill space. They were not externalizations of thought, but rather distortions of the vision or misleading impressions. How can you heal something that's not really there? Because it isn't. It is your deluded thinking, seeing, feeling, hearing. So we were taught once, well, if you think you have some problem, well, think about, do you have feathers? Do you believe you have feathers? It's just this ridiculous.
And that's why it's important to refute the claim that Christian Science is just another alternative medicine.
Thank you very much, yes.
Yes.
Because there is this large misconception among many so-called Christian scientists that Christian Science is like a medicine. It's there to heal your body when you need it. And this speaks directly to that. You can't fix broken matter. You can't fix it. Matter is the problem. The false belief about matter is the problem. When you have a problem, the healing is to correct your thinking, to correct your sight, your spiritual sight, to see that it is not real. That is the healing. And it requires work. It's not easy to get to that point. But that is the answer. I loved what Florence wrote about in her blog. Mrs. Eddy refers to, talks about evil in the textbook. She says, evil is not power. It is a mockery of strength. There's that word again.
And we've talked about, too, it's a fine line between just ignoring it and saying, oh, it doesn't exist, and then demonstrating this truth and understanding these principles, because the other is wrong, too. And there are many scientists who just say, oh, well, it doesn't exist, it's not real, so that. But they don't have the understanding as to why it's not. So, again, Martha Wilcox says, Paul's demonstration was not in destroying the viper's power to cause death. This was when the viper bit him. His demonstration was the proof that a viper is mind in particular form expression. Vipers had never been anything but what God is in being. And yet, because many persons believed that their misconception of a viper was an object, and this object had life and of itself, these people died. They died not because their misconception of a viper existed as an objectified thing, not because they were bitten by a viper, but they died because of their belief or delusion. They died because of their belief, and that's what that Anita Morjani, who passed on and came back, said. She didn't die because of the cancer. She died because of a belief in a cancer that she thought could destroy her. It was her belief. And the only way to get rid of belief is to get the proper understanding of what God is.
And then she realized that her death was an illusion as well.
Yeah, because she hadn't died.
One false belief leads to another false belief. They're all false beliefs.
And then Mrs. Wilcox says, Oh, how many of you are spending much time in inharmony because you have objectified your misconception of man as a husband or wife or somebody and given this illusion life. All within. The dominion is within. But you can't idly just parrot the words and say the words. That's very annoying to a spiritually minded person who is hearing people parrot the words when they're not proving it in their life.
But the fact is, all is mind and its infinite manifestation. For God is all in all. Therefore, when you humanize anybody, you think of them as a mortal. You are malpracticing, and you are creating in your own thought an illusion.
When you're afraid of them, when you don't speak up to them, all of that. And you can't do that and at the same time say, oh, well, they're perfect, everything's great. So we're going to end now also with Word Made Flesh. I've given this often to those of you, especially with animals, but it's the healing of Mrs. Eddie's horse in her home, how they did it.
Once, when at Mrs. Eddie's home, one of her beautiful horses was in a serious claim. This was reported to her, and in substance she said, what the horse is to you is not actually the way that the idea is. Dr. Powell said, things are not what they seem. No, things are what they are. They are figures of the true. If our faith were more simple, we would see them as they are, expressions of the divine in forms we call material. She showed us that we did not need to heal a horse, but we did need to restore our vision from that which was untrue to that which was true in the realm of consciousness. The work was not to be done on the horse. The only horse there was already perfect. And she showed us that the true horse was the one and the same horse in each individual consciousness. We thoroughly understood that the horse, which we saw as material and sick, was to be seen as it was. We were not to change a sick horse into a well horse, but we were to change our thought from belief to truth. The horse did not need healing. Mrs. Eddy only restored our vision to see truth or fact, that the only mind present was aware of its own perfection. And with the restoration of our vision from that of belief to truth, the horse appeared to us as he had always been.
Saw ye my Savior, heard ye the glad sound, felt ye the power of the word. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.